The Southern Railway Z-Class were powerful 080 tank engines, designed for heavy shunting. Only 8 were ever built, all completed in 1929. You may believe, because of this, that they were failures, but that is just not the case. When the Southern Railway was formed, they had quite a few larger tank engines, like the G16s, built for heavy shunting and short-distance movements, but Monsell considered them to be over-engineered and not the most efficient engines. When he took office, he chose to make a simpler design, with better adhesion and lower maintenance costs just for shunting. Uri's G16 was built to a 480 wheel arrangement, taking a substantial amount of weight off of the driving wheels, which were 5 feet 1 inch in diameter. They had superheaters and large fireboxes, with 27 square feet of grate area, just 1 foot less than Gresley's massive K3s. They had 2 large cylinders, a total weight of 95 tons, and an adhesive weight of 73 tons. Monsell's Z-Class were 080s, meaning every bit of their 71 tons went into adhesion. Their drivers were 5 inches smaller. Their third cylinder meant they could put their power down more consistently. Their firebox grate area was 18.6 square feet, making it closer in size to the firebox of an E1 than a G16. As far as tractive effort's concerned, the G16's 33,991 pounds, and Z-Class had just 29,300. The Zs were designed at Ashford Works, built at Brighton due to a construction issue with another class. This means that a couple of changes were made. The boiler was taken from a Marsh C3 class. The outside cylinders ran on Walshart's valve gear, and the inside cylinder was a unique gear built specifically for this engine. They had steam brakes, vacuum brakes, and steam heating so they could do passenger shunting in a pinch, but this really isn't what they were meant for. They were for hump yards. These engines were all built between March and September of 1929, and another batch of 10 was intended to be built because they did prove successful, but the Great Depression had other ideas, and the plans would be cancelled in 1931. Not because the engines were unusually expensive to build or anything, but because the work they were built for had been massively reduced. By the time that their work had been growing again, Monsell had already moved on to experimenting with diesel traction, having built 3 diesel shunters. These engines had a slightly higher maximum tractive effort than the Z-Class. They were lighter, they were shorter in length, meaning they could take tighter curves, and even more concerning for the Z-Class, they were much cheaper to operate. Sure, they had a higher buy-in cost, but they saved over £1,000 a year in running costs per engine. The Southern, and later BR, would build more of them with some changes, calling it the Class 12, and eventually the Class 8. It wasn't over for the Zs yet, though. During the Second World War, 3 were loaned to the War Department, which put them to work in Scotland. They handled winding routes and steep climbs quite well, if only a bit slowly. The 3-cylinder design was unusual to cruise in the area, though, so these engines came with a steeper learning curve than most, and they'd be returned to the Southern in 1943. The Zs were exceptionally sure-footed, powerful, and fairly quiet engines. They were loved by crews. Surely they'd last a while then, and they did. As more diesels were built, the Z-Class would be pushed away to less demanding yards, and by 1962 they were all relocated to the western end of the southern region. Then, there was a reorganization. The area that the Z-Class were allocated to was handed over from the southern region of BR to the western region, which is much more dedicated to standardization at the time. A small class of heavy 080 shunters was just not useful to the western region. They had more than enough engines to do that sort of work, and so the Z-Class was withdrawn. The entire class was built in 1929, and the entire class would be withdrawn in 1962. Every one of the engines had a roughly 33-year service life. For steam engines as a whole, that's kind of average, but short-lived for a southern tank engine. There was an attempt to save a Z-Class in the 60s and bring it to the Bluebell Railway, but this ended up falling through, and after being moved around and left in scrap lines, the last of this class would be cut up in May of 1965. Engine crews liked them. They proved reliable, and they just wouldn't slip. But they also couldn't go very far. Their fuel capacity was low, so they couldn't do any substantial train work, and they had nowhere to escape to when those diesel shunters came around. Sure, they'd likely have done well as bankers, but it wasn't really needed where they were, and the inconvenience of moving them all north would have probably not been worth it, realistically. Instead, they'd keep to what they were built for until the work they were made for was taken out from under them. If they hadn't been taken in by the western region, they may have lasted a year or two longer, but there's no way to know for sure. Large tank engines all over BR were just disappearing at the time, with several classes vanishing within a year. Who's to say these would have been any different? Alright, I love the way these things look. They're heavy, not super refined, not particularly unrefined, but also, I mean, come on, they're workhorses, look at it. There's no need to make them look great. They're built to move a lot of weight a short distance, and you can see it just by looking at the side of it. Those small tanks tell you it's not really meant to go anywhere. But 8 small driving wheels falls in line with a heavy goods focus. One of these wouldn't look out of place at all, banking heavy trains up steep hills, or maybe pulling heavy loads of coal for short distances. It looks almost too big for the hump yards it was made for, yet it was smaller than the G16s by 20 tons. Maybe that's just because I always think of diesel shunters when I think of hump yards. Might be on me. I don't have a whole lot to say about this class, I just think they're neat and that's why you're seeing this video. If you've got anything to add or anything you'd like to see me cover, drop it down in the comments and I'll see about making something on it. This entire channel is just an excuse for me to learn about trains. I'm loving it here. Thanks for watching. I'll be back next week with another video.